From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb is featured on this week's Cattle Market segment. He'll pass along some interesting new information on current trends in beef cut retail sales. And Jim will preview as well this week's USDA Cattle on Feed report. Then K-State's Jisang Yu will talk about his new analysis of the insurance program for pasture and forage managers called Rainfall Index Insurance. He and his colleagues have compared the two ways this coverage can be calculated and have looked at the times of year when the coverage would be most beneficial to you producers. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Amy Sollock about National 4-H Week coming up in October. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You are tuned into Agriculture Today, our Monday edition. Thanks for joining us as we talk over cattle market factors now. Once again, along with us from his office in Denver, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb. Jim, we'll begin by just quickly looking back at last week's cattle trade. The live cattle futures did have a great showing of it to finish off the week.
They did, Eric. The October contract on the live cattle futures was limit up at $3 per hundredweight, and we had a nice rally throughout the week, and the feeder cattle followed suit. Feeder cattle also got some help from the USDA WASDE report, their monthly forecast, and their forecast there on the corn side, quite positive for the feeder cattle. So the cattle markets, and it looks like the cash cattle trade is going to follow suit eventually. Packers clearly had to step up and buy cattle. We actually had weekly slaughter nearly 1% above a year ago, and there appeared to be some short-bought packers out there. Packer margins are quite positive, so they have room to maneuver in here, and that's what we saw this past week.
You bring up the USDA's World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report released last Wednesday. The change of note for the cattle sector, the national corn production number and the yield per acre number, of course, those work in concert, and those were much higher than pre-report expectations. You say how positive that is for the calf trade. How much so?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts in the marketplace, as you well know, Eric, but if we look back historically in the Southern Plains, about a 10-cent move per bushel on corn price up or down pushes the Southern Plains calf price up or down in the reverse pattern by about $1 per hundredweight. So, clearly corn is a major cost of production for the feedlots, and that does feed back into calf and yearling prices rather quickly. Now, we already had yearling prices priced that our latest break-evens for placing animals last month was about $128 per hundredweight. So we've taken these feeder cattle prices up, but they continue to ratchet up on the corn crop. And as you mentioned, USDA came out with a national average corn yield of over 181 bushels per acre, by far a record high corn yield nationally. And that pushed down corn prices, especially in the cash market, been supportive of feeder cattle prices, probably more than anticipated.
And that support may endure for a while, might it not? Feed costs heading into the fall and then the winter could be quite manageable for backgrounders and finishers, for that matter.
Absolutely, Eric. In some areas we have some rather high-cost hay, but other feedstuffs seem to be very favorably priced, especially here in the short term as we move to the new crop. The cash market have softened significantly for major feedstuffs in the last couple weeks, especially for soybean meal and cottonseed meal. That may continue here a little bit longer.
Speaking to the demand side for a moment, what's the latest on boxed beef as per this past week's trade?
Well, the boxed beef market, this is typically a time of the year where the boxed beef is marking lower almost every week. And I think the major story in that wholesale beef market was in the negotiated trade or the cash market in that meat side, the tonnage was very robust last week. In fact, the largest tonnage for any week in that negotiated trade since mid-July. So we moved a lot of meat in the marketplace. That's a pretty positive sign here, especially at this time of year, that there is some potential momentum behind this marketplace fundamentally to support the cattle markets.
Now, Jim, you've done a little digging into the beef demand side and more specifically the differences in the beef cuts and how they're moving on the marketplace, and share what you found there.
Well, it's pretty interesting, Eric, at least to an economist. One of the factors that's gone on, we have quite a bit more prime beef production than we've had really ever in history back as we've had recorded data on the quality grades. So the prime products are down 15-20% compared to a year ago, but that's only a small proportion of the marketplace. So when we look across the market at the other cuts, we start to see a story unfolding where the overall cutout values were above a year ago for the month of August. Again, the prime was down a little bit. But if we look at the underlying components, the rib component was up 3 to 4%. Again, the prime was the down component there, and the loin was up 2 to 4%. So that's part of the story fundamentally behind our meat market reflecting this underlying consumer demand for products. We step back a little bit more, though, when we look at the non-steak types of cuts, and those two prior categories reflect those. The chuck was up 4 to 5% year over year, which is pretty strong for the chuck. Now, the chuck has evolved over the last decade or so where we get more steak cuts out of the chuck. The round was down 4 to 5% year over year, and the brisket was up 15 to 20% year over year,
wow,
reflecting the strong component, especially in our restaurant industry and increasingly in grocery stores for cooked brisket products and even for people cooking those at home. So we're seeing some dynamic changes in the marketplace. Again, the prime is under some pressure. It's still at a premium, and that mostly is a steak item because of larger supplies. But then we look at all the other categories, and there's some real winners, and those would be, to some extent, the steak cuts, and then certainly the brisket component has been the stellar backbone in the overall beef marketplace.
Some of this reflective, Jim, of how the beef industry has taken it upon itself to, through research, support, and otherwise develop the traditional cuts into even more appealing product for the consumer?
Absolutely, Eric. I think this very much applies to the chuck component, where a lot of these petite sirloins are developed through the checkoff programs, et cetera, and those have been, researchers at universities, et cetera, and we've taken some more of the high-value cuts out of some of the historically low-value parts of the carcass and added quite a bit of value to that. And then on the brisket side, I think it hasn't been that much of a story in terms of new products, but it's certainly been a growing demand component, especially in the restaurant industry for brisket-type outlets. So all those fit together to be subtle changes, but are adding up to a year-over-year increase in the month of August in the cutout value, and that relies on all those factors that you described to get us there. Some of it's not overnight changes. These are evolutions that have happened over recent years that are making quite a difference in the meat markets and then hence in the cattle market.
A great development to see on behalf of the beef industry there. Coming up this Friday, Jim, the monthly USDA Cattle on Feed report, and LMIC has come up with its pre-report estimates. Once more, all eyes are on placements to see if they continue to escalate.
And I think that is the crux of the story, Eric. We have placements, and this will shock some people, up 6.6% year over year. A month or two ago, we would not have anticipated that. We've been placing cattle very aggressively, at least in the last 3 or 4 months. And these are August data, and these will be as of September 1. We have marketings that equal to a year ago. Now, a year ago, marketings were superb, and we've continued that trend this year. The weights of steers actually fell by a pound last week. So the carcass weights show very much that we're very current in the feedlots. But that leaves us an on-feed inventory of up 5 to 6% from a year ago. That's a pretty large number. Now, on the placement side, to kind of backtrack, those are large placements year over year, but those are still placements below August of 2011. And we have a calf crop that's very similar to 2010, 2011 in terms of total quantity of animals that are coming into the marketplace. So even though that's a large year-over-year increase, and I think will really catch a lot of attention in the media and amongst the market analysts, it's not something to worry about a lot. But we have more cattle to work through by nearly 6% compared to last year. A lot of those were placed as lightweight calves, but they will have to come to market. So this is a report I think that will get a lot of attention, and I think maybe the pre-report's estimates will have a pretty wide range reflecting the uncertainty from analysts. One of the things as a subtlety contributing to the larger placements is our imports of feeder cattle out of Mexico were about 30,000 head above a year ago. And those, given the pasture and range conditions, it appears that most of those went into feed yards in the Southern Plains. So there is kind of an international component here where for the short term, because of the dryness in Mexico, we've had more cattle coming north and feedlots bidding pretty aggressively for those as they are for calves and yearlings from U.S. operations.
But it's to be stressed again that even though the number may look daunting, we're not talking about a wall of cattle rolling over this market anytime soon.
Not anytime soon, Eric. And in fact, given the placement weight breakdown and the percentage of heifers that are on feed, we can roll through this. It's more like a wave rather than a wall of cattle. And it's not imminent. It's not something that's going to hit the market in the next 30 or 60 or even probably 90 days. These placements of lightweight cattle are on feed for many months.
All right. Once again, the USDA to post those new numbers on cattle on feed this Friday, the monthly cattle on feed report. Do check out information that Jim and his colleague, Caitlin McCulloch, post regularly on the lmic.info website out of the center, lmic.info. And we appreciate your comments as always. Jim, many thanks.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
He is the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, which is a project co-sponsored by numerous land-grant universities, including K-State. That's Jim Robb with this week's Cattle Market Insight on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Next up for you on this Agriculture Today, we'll share some information that's been generated recently out of the Agricultural Economics Department here at K-State. It was a detailed analysis of a product that's out there and available to cattle producers, those who manage pasture and forage. It's a Rainfall Index Insurance program. And this analysis looked at some of the factors that make that work and, in fact, may have a lot to do with the appeal of this program to producers. Along with us now is agricultural economist here at K-State, Jisang Yu. He was one of the co-authors on this research. And what caused you to want to look at this, Jisang?
This Rainfall Index Insurance for pasture producers is a relatively new program. It's been out there for the last decade or so. But the question and the motivating question behind this program is that this insurance product is not based on individual outcome. It is tied to some index values, which has nothing to do with actual production level. And it makes sense because the forage or pasture, we don't have much information about their historical yield, and therefore it's hard to rate them and hard to give them a indemnity payment and et cetera and et cetera. So the product is designed in a way that if some rainfall index fall below the threshold, then producers are going to get paid from this program. But there was growing concerns about whether that index or index values are highly correlated with the individual production levels, right? So it's a matter of how much of the risk actually this program is protecting versus what's remaining. So Monty and I talked about these issues, and we fortunately got some good information about the site-level yield from a 3 university-managed ranch, and we have site-level precipitation, and we have also the index values that risk management agencies use.
Mm-hmm. You referred to Monty Vanderveer of K-State, who was your co-author. Might also note that you worked with a couple of pasture researchers, one from K-State, one from the University of Nebraska on this project, right?
Yep.
So we credit them too, Keith Harmony and Jerry Valesky, respectively. So how this works, again, it's based on the index values, it's based on observations, but you wanted to get a handle on the basis risk, as it's put, that's associated with this index insurance. What is that? How does it fit in?
Yeah, so let me give you a bit more details about how this PRF program works.
Please.
Is that basically what producers do is choose a 2-month intervals to be insured. And for those corresponding month intervals, we do have rainfall index values, which is computed using a grid level data. So that's not necessarily either their production or their rainfall values, but it's the grid that they're located in. And this idea of basis risk comes from the idea that this index is not exactly same as your individual outcome. So normally when we talk about basis risk is the risk of you as a producer not getting paid from the insurance program when in fact you have a loss. And in order to have a good quality index insurance product, we do like to have that basis risk as minimal as possible.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Otherwise, the program would not be popular with producers if that basis risk was too high. So how did you go about pulling this together? Now, the paper that you've written on this is extremely detailed, and we won't go into all the inner workings of it, but in general terms, how did you approach this question?
We start with field level or site level yield data, and we're trying to model this in a way that how much of the yield variability is being explained by the site level precipitation. And also we're going to compare that with the alternative model that uses the grid level indices, which this program is based on. So we estimate the correlation between the index values from the grid versus the site level yield variability. At the end of the day, what we want to know is that out of many years, how many years that this index is predicting that those sites are having a bad year versus the actual precipitation is predict a bad year for those sites and actual bad years, right? So we have 3 possible outcomes, and we would like to compute the probabilities of either index or precipitation failing to predict the bad years.
And so you were able to come up with that evaluation of those alternatives, those options, to see which one is more indicative of a loss?
Exactly. So there's some key numbers we're getting out of this analysis is that using this index values, we're missing about 26% of the bad years. So conditional on each site having a bad year, i.e. Below average, PRF indices are failing to predict that those sites are having a bad year, about 26% of many years that we're observing. Now, we're comparing that number with the analysis with actual precipitation level for those sites. And for that model, we're failing about 21%. Now, this 5% difference is the number that we would like to talk about for the producers who's concerning about the gap between the grid level index and their own precipitation. Our argument is, well, we know that grid level is not exactly your precipitation, but 5% is not too much. So you're pretty much okay in terms of what you're missing for not having your own site-specific precipitation. But other remaining 21% or 26%, it's not about precipitation. It's about something else, your soil quality or your management practices. And again, we know that this index-based insurance cannot fully explain your own variability. But again, our key point of this analysis is to tell producers, yes, this product have some shortcomings, but it's not about the grid level precipitation measure versus your precipitation. An additional component of our analysis is then for the producers, which month matter for you. So that's another key estimate we're getting out of this analysis.
Because a producer can only secure that protection for 2 months.
Let me clarify this. So it's a bit complicated, but producers get to choose a couple of 2-month intervals.
Okay.
So you can sign up, for example, January, February interval and May, June intervals. Okay. You can allocate your values into those 2 intervals. And the question for producers is, which month do I allocate my liabilities? And our answer to that particular question is May, June, and June, July, or July, August. Those 3 2-month intervals matters most. So it doesn't make too much sense to put your liability into January, February, or November, December.
Which makes perfect sense, really, because that's
exactly
the production season for pasture and forage.
Yeah. But in practice, when you look at for the sign-up rate for those intervals, we do see pretty large numbers for the producer who allocate their liability to January and February or November and December. And that raises a bit of concern. And this paper, we do not talk about sign-up patterns, but we have a follow-up work that we're looking at the participation decisions. And that raises a bit of questions like the way this program operates. So our advice to the producers is to buy the growing season intervals, and that will probably explain a lot of your yield variability, and it can work as pretty okay risk management tools. But there's still remaining questions that we would like to investigate behind those farmers who's buying the non-growing season intervals.
Just saying this has shed some light on the program and some of its strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Is your hope here that this background can then be used as consideration for policymakers as they look at this product and maybe think about adjusting it to make it a more appealing product to producers?
That's the hope. So with this work and the follow-up work with Monty and other colleague in Auburn University, we're writing another piece investigating something about just the participation patterns. And combining these 2 works, we are hoping to talk more about this and reach out to producers and also reach out to the folks in risk management agencies and think about potential improvement or more detailed analysis of this pasture rainfall index insurance program.
Very good. For the here and now, though, the message to producers is the product may not be perfect, but it has its value.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. And our advice is do choose the growing season and also the concern about the gap between your site level precipitation versus grid level precipitation. You probably don't need to worry too much about it.
Yeah. Good. Interesting work, and we thank you for coming over talking about it. Folks can see the write-up on this on the agmanager.info website, can they not?
Exactly, yeah.
So if you'd like to learn more about what they've studied here, why go to that website. You're looking for estimating the basis risk of Rainfall Index Insurance for pasture, rangeland, and forage. Thanks, Jisang, for coming over once again.
Thanks.
Jisang Yu is an agricultural economist at Kansas State University. Once again, he and fellow economist with K-State, Monty Vanderveer, partnered with other researchers to put this analysis together. Good piece of information on the performance of the Rainfall Index Insurance for pasture and forages. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, a new outbreak of African swine fever has been reported on a farm in northern China's Inner Mongolia. The Agriculture Ministry reports that it's the second in the region as the highly contagious disease continues to spread rapidly across the world's top producer of pigs. 8 hogs were dead and 14 were infected on the farm of 159 animals. The outbreak is China's 16th since early August and comes despite a series of tough new rules announced by Beijing last week to tackle the spread. China has now banned the transport of live hogs and pig products from regions bordering provinces that have reported swine fever outbreaks, as well as those that have had cases. Well, Mother Nature is busy whipping up a recipe for wheat streak mosaic virus in western Kansas this year. According to Kansas State University Extension agronomist Jeannie Falk-Jones, with good soil moisture and plenty of volunteer wheat in the mix already, Mother Nature only needs a long, warm fall to round out the risk for an outbreak. Jones told DTN that we will be at a bit more elevated risk in western Kansas this year because plentiful rain throughout the summer allowed volunteer wheat to germinate and emerge continuously for the past 3 months. Volunteer wheat serves as a refuge during the summer to the wheat curl mite, a tiny insect that carries 3 serious wheat viruses: High Plains mosaic, Triticum mosaic, and wheat streak mosaic. When wheat is planted in the fall, the mites can migrate from the volunteer plants into the newly emerged crop and infect it. Because there is no treatment for the viruses, yield losses often follow. Wheat streak mosaic, in particular, has been a problem for Kansas farmers. They saw outbreaks of the disease in 2015 and again in 2017, when experts estimate the virus cost wheat growers at least 19.2 million bushels of wheat and $76.8 million. Like the summer preceding that 2017 outbreak, Jones says this season has been challenging for volunteer wheat control. Hailstorms shattered many wheat heads, and the timely rains have helped the fallen wheat seeds germinate. Falk-Jones says that volunteers should be dead a full 2 weeks before growers start drilling wheat to ensure the mites will not infect the new crop. Well, the USDA estimates over 1 billion bushels of wheat to be exported from the U.S. in 2018. Globally, other top wheat exporting countries face a different situation in their markets than in most years. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien says he thinks the U.S. is likely to still help support prices through the end of the year. He explains more about slow export markets.
From July 1st through the end of August, we, with good reason, bought the expectation that there are short crops around the world and looked to those to give us potential for U.S. export movement of wheat. And then, of course, we added in a surprisingly good protein crop on top of that. The hoped-for result hasn't, quote, shown up yet. If you isolate the top 7 world wheat exporters, with some of which have had crop problems this year, they're almost as tight as they were back in 2012-13, and that's when we had $6 and $7 wheat around the world. The other side of this, though, is that if you look at what the rest of the world has, again, taking out the exporters and even taking out China, which is sort of monolithically providing for itself in wheat for the most part, and look at the world stocks to use is as high as it's been in 21 years.
An individual nation's food security also influences its local market. Looking ahead, O'Brien says that wheat export projections show supple outlooks.
In kind of a front-loaded manner, I don't know how strong we can expect world wheat export demand to be, really. But in the latter part of this marketing year, when a lot of these domestic supplies get whittled down some and countries have more of a focus on preserving their own stockpiles for food security, and when they start looking to those world wheat exporters, those top 7, and see that they're tight, it looks like, logically, that the strength in U.S. exports is probably going to be more on the backside of this marketing year.
O'Brien continues to watch the larger suppliers and purchasers of wheat globally.
People have to make their own judgments, but it does look like the supplies that are front-loaded right now in the hands of those who would potentially be buying are very likely to get tighter as we move along in time here and past the first of the year. When they start looking around for buyers, gosh, there just isn't as much available. We're at 1.025 billion bushels. We just talked about how tight the world situation is for major exporters. I don't know that you'd see a washout, even if we had lower exports than what the USDA is projecting.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. And, of course, you can hear his latest grain market outlook on Friday on Agriculture Today. And in this week's Tree Tales, K-State Forester Jaron Tyndall outlined steps that private landowners can take to slow down stream bank erosion and, in the process, extend the life of reservoirs.
As many of you know, our federal reservoirs in Kansas are steadily filling with sediment. This poses a serious long-term problem for public water supplies in our state, and the pressing nature of the problem has led to an increased effort by conservation agencies to try to slow the sedimentation rate down and extend the usable life of our reservoirs. Our best estimates indicate that approximately half of the sediment is coming from stream bank erosion, and my own work is centered around trying to bring that erosion rate down. I work with private landowners who, of their own accord, are motivated to restore and protect their streams. I walk their streams with them, conduct site assessments, explain treatment options, and help them get connected with engineers and financial assistance services as needed. One of the most fun and satisfying projects I've helped a landowner with was a cedar tree revetment, where we anchored a long row of freshly cut cedar trees end to end along the base of an eroding stream bank, and then planted willow stakes into the mud behind the cedars. Right after we put the revetment in, a heavy rain made the creek run high against the bank. As we had hoped, the shaggy limbs of the cedar trees slowed the current so much that the stream dropped sediment out along the bank instead of eroding it away. Soon afterwards, most of our willow stakes sprouted. They are now growing into a thick wall of vegetation on top of the freshly deposited sediment. The project was an overwhelming success and required a relatively small investment from the landowner. The parts of the cedar trees that aren't buried by sediment will rot away before too long, but the willows are getting good sun and are rooted near the water, so they should stay put for a very long time, providing erosion control for the farmer and keeping sediment out of the downstream reservoir. Since there was such an easily identified public benefit from this project, the landowner was able to receive financial assistance from a local conservation group. There are a few different conservation agencies that can aid landowners with stream stabilization projects. The kinds of projects they can support and their areas of focus vary widely, but they have the same goals of reducing erosion and protecting our water resources. If you have stream erosion issues on your land and would like to know what can feasibly be done about it, I encourage you to give me a call. Also, mark your calendars for a free educational workshop to be held on January 15th in Seneca, Kansas, where you can learn more about stream management and connect with professionals in this field. To register, please visit the Delaware River RAPS website. This has been Jaron Tyndall with the Kansas Forest Service, and you've been listening to another Tree Tale.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. As the nation's largest youth development organization, 4-H programs empower nearly 6 million young people across the U.S. through experiences that develop critical life skills. National 4-H Week begins October 7th and runs through the 13th. The theme, Inspire Kids to Do, is the campaign focus for the new 4-H year, which begins in October. Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock says 30 Days of Doing is currently underway to celebrate kids who are doing great things in Kansas and across the country. Amy, maybe a little bit of background on the Inspire Kids to Do campaign. What all is involved with that campaign?
We're really excited. This is our first year to kind of launch the celebration preceding National 4-H Week. So for 2018, we've launched the next phase of our 4-H Grows True Leaders campaign, and that's Inspire Kids to Do. And it's really centered around doers, if you will. You know, we know that this country was built by doers, and for, over 100 years, 4-H has been a part of learning by doing. And so this whole campaign is really an effort to get kids engaged in their communities, engaged with adult volunteers and mentors, and to get them doing.
And how do we get them doing? Are these through service projects or other projects?
You name it, as long as they're doing. We've got kind of an outlined calendar for the month with suggested activities, anything from science-based learning activities to community service, project ideas, social get-together ideas with 4-H clubs. So it really doesn't matter as long as you're getting out there and being active in your community.
And this is something that you would like them to document as well?
Yeah, we would love to hear what you're doing. We've got exciting things on social media, so if kids and adult volunteers throughout the state are doing things the month of September, we want to hear about it because we want to promote it via our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, so that everybody can hear what we're doing. And nationally, it's been really fun to see what other kids and programs have done from across the country.
And this is something that is taking place through the entire month?
Yeah. The 30 days of doing will take place for the month of September, but the whole notion of inspiring kids to do that hands-on learning, that community engagement piece, will really be carried throughout the next calendar year. So we're kind of hitting it hard the month of September, but it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to continue to see that inspire kids to do throughout the end of 2018 and into 2019.
And the fact that they're learning by doing, that's really kind of the 4-H way, isn't it? And really in all of the service areas.
Absolutely. We've been doing hands-on learning by doing, for over 100 years. It's kind of the cornerstone piece of what makes 4-H so special. You know, the physical act of learning and processing that with one another and being able to apply that to the world around the kids is what makes our learning process so special and so successful.
And this is one of those things that really even maybe sets them up for a career path.
Absolutely. Everything we do in 4-H is technically a pathway to a future career. So we hope to sort of ignite a spark for an interest area or a passion that they can then further learn about and discover through 4-H, and then that can ultimately turn into, you know, a long-time career. And we've seen that over and over. A lot of our alumni can provide testimony to that, where they learned great communication skills and they now work, you know, in news media or radio. We have people that have learned, you know, nutrition and physical activity, and they're now dietitians. And so we've seen that for many years. But the whole notion of inspiring kids to do and finding that passion area where they really love to learn and excel in, and then hopefully connect that to a higher education opportunity and a future career, well, that's the ultimate goal.
And because 4-H offers so many different project areas, they really can go a little bit out of their comfort zone and try some other things.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a career. Maybe you want to try something new and you discover that isn't, you know, something that you're super passionate about. Well, that's okay, because as a kid, that's the time to learn those things and experiment with different project areas and interest areas. And by the end of a 4-H career, we feel pretty confident that children will find that one thing that they really love and want to pursue for lifelong. But again, we encourage kids to try things out, and it's all about discovery and forming relationships as they do that.
And because 4-H begins at such a young age, you have a chance to really experience a lot of things throughout 4-H if you stick with it.
Yeah, potentially, you know, you have upwards of 10 or 11 years if you join 4-H at 7, at the earliest age that we allow membership. So yeah, whether you're in it 1 or 2 years or you're in it for the full 10 or 11, we encourage kids to discover, to explore, and really it's fun to watch that learning process happen over the years.
And this is a time when you're also trying to get other children involved with 4-H and maybe join 4-H because the new year is about to begin.
Yeah, our new 4-H year begins October 1, so no better time than the month of September to inspire kids to do and get them sort of immersed in a 4-H learning experience. We encourage everybody that's interested in joining 4-H or finding out more information to contact your local K-State Research and Extension office or visit kansas4-h.org to find a 4-H club near you.
And is there also a contest associated with this?
Yeah, there's a fun photography contest that National 4-H Council is sponsoring. During the month of September, you could win up to a $10,000 scholarship for a 4-H young person. and their state 4-H program could receive an additional $10,000. So there's some big money, potentially prize money associated with this. And all you need to do is submit a photo that shows how you've inspired yourself or others to do with a purpose. And, of course, those rules are on 4h.org for that specific contest. But certainly we would encourage all Kansas youth to submit a photo and potentially win up to a $10,000 scholarship.
And as you mentioned, make sure that they're sharing what they're doing through social media or just with their local media outlet.
Yes. Whether you submit a news article to your local paper or you make a social media post, use the hashtag #InspireToDo, and that'll make sure that we hear and see what you're doing out in the local communities.
And again, if people need more information, they can find that on the 4-H website.
Yes, Kansas4-H.org.
That's Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, for more information, contact your local county or district extension office or visit kansas4-h.org, kansas4-h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.